Here we go, everybody. The book we're reviewing, How Not to Diet. Previous book that this doctor wrote was called How Not Die, and it also covered nutrition. He's a medical doctor in the United States. Michael Gerber, can't read it backwards, Greger, and we're going to dig right in right now. When I picked this book up, I thought, whoa, there's a lot of good stuff in here. You'll notice it's a little fat book. There's over 500 pages. And in those pages, he tries to distill all of the best practices. So in the preface, we're not even into the book yet, but in the preface, we're going to talk about going down the rabbit hole. He talks about if there was a simple, safe, side effect-free solution to obesity, we'd know about it now, right? Well, the diet profession is a $50 billion a year business for the diet industry. So a lot of things have been ignored or overlooked, things that people can do for themselves over the years. He says his dear grandmother was cured of end-stage heart disease by one of Dean Ornish's contemporaries, Pritikin, using similar methods. She was 65 when they gave her a medical death sentence. But thanks to changing her diet, she was able to live another 31 years to age 96 and continued to enjoy her 6 grandkids, which included this doctor. The number one killer of men and women is obesity and overweight. And here's part of the problem. This doctor, he hates diet books. He hates heart disease, but he also hates diet books. And especially diet books that say that they hate diet books. But he doesn't want to fill it with filler, fantasy, or fluff. He's just giving you the facts here. He says if you want testimonials and before and after pictures, you've come to the wrong place. He says you have science here to back you up, so you don't need success stories. He is interested in the science. When you're making life and death decisions for your family and yourself, you want to know the science. He says every month seems to bring us to trendy new diets or weight loss fads, and they always sell because they always fail. The diet industry may rake in up to $50 billion a year. The business model is based on repeat customers. Who would that be? We're always trying the newest and the best thing, right? People are racked with guilt and self-hatred because they keep failing, so they line right back up and they're fooled again. He hopes to break that cycle with this book. Even just sticking to the peer-reviewed scientific literature is not enough. An article in the New England Journal of Medicine on obesity myths concluded that false and scientifically unsupported beliefs about obesity are pervasive. And they're not just pervasive in us, people who don't know any better. They're pervasive in the medical field too. So there are all of these literature and reviewers and research that we can look, but who's got time for that? There's more than 500,000 scientific papers on obesity and 100 new ones published every day. This doctor, who also wrote Trying Not to Die, has an organization, nutritionfacts.org, nutritionfacts, F-A-C-T-S.org. They comb through tens of thousands of studies a year, so we don't have to. He discovered all kinds of exciting new tools and tricks and tips along the way, as well as the best science. And some things like simple spices proven in randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled studies to accelerate weight loss for pennies a day. but there's not a big profit potential here, so it's no wonder those studies never saw the light of day. This doctor donates 100% of his proceeds from his DVDs, speaking engagements, and books to charity because it means a lot to him. He wants to do for your family what Pritikin did for his. You might have heard about Pritikin before. I'm old enough that I remember hearing about him. The literary agent for this doctor told him that nobody wants a fat diet book. They want to be as slim as they can with a slim little book that doesn't give them too much information, but just enough. However, this is the compact version. You might say, oh, this is the compact version. But it was important for him to include all the details. And if you have the book, you can skip down to the summaries at the end of each section for his take-home suggestions, because he wanted to clearly articulate how he arrives at each of the recommendations in this book. There's a reference section in the back of the book also. Maybe we'll get to that when we get toward the end. The benefit of laying it all out for you is that you get to decide for yourself. As the famed scientist Carl Sagan said, science by itself cannot advocate courses of human action, but it can certainly illuminate the possible consequences of alternative courses of action. And then he goes on to talk about what does it mean to be overweight or obese. In simple terms, being overweight means you have too much body fat, where being obese means you have way too much body fat. And they go on to talk about a BMI. If your BMI is between 25 to 29.9, that means you are overweight. Below 24.9 is considered ideal weight. You can go to a BMI calculator or you can calculate it on your own. Just Google how to calculate my own BMI. Find out whether you're a normal weight or not. But isn't a calorie just a calorie? I mean, if you eat 500 calories a day, you're going to lose weight, right? But are you going to get healthy? Let's find out. The notion that a calorie, and you know, this is something I've thought about for a long time, so I was happy to see it in print. The notion that a calorie from one source is just as fattening as a calorie from any other source is something that the food industry says to try to absolve itself of guilt. Coca-Cola even put out an ad that says, this one simple commonplace fact, as 1 calorie is the same as another calorie. The chair of Harvard's nutrition department says this central argument from industry is that overconsumption of calories from carrots, would be no different from overconsumption of calories from soda. If a calorie is just a calorie, what does it matter what kind of foods we eat? Well, I'm going to skip down a little bit. If you were able to eat 240 calories of carrots, it's about 5 cups of carrots. You might not even be able to fit them all in your stomach. Like all whole plant foods, carrots have fiber, which adds bulk without net calories. What's more, you wouldn't even absorb all the calories because of the fiber. So a calorie, 240 calories of carrots, not going to be the same as 240 calories of liquid bottle of Coke. In part 1 of this book, which we're going to get to by and by, it starts with outlining our growing problem with obesity. And you know, in the last little video that I made, which you may not have seen, about several years ago, many years ago, I found a book made in the 50s. It was the history of the 50s in the county that I live in. And as I looked at that book, I saw that something was different, but I couldn't figure out what was different right away. And then I realized everybody was thin. Everybody in the book was thin. Everybody was skinny, except the butcher. The man who owned the butcher shop, he was portly. Why was that? He had access to more food, probably better food. Maybe he had more money to buy more food. Maybe his wife was the baker next door. Everybody else in the book was thin. There were no fast food places yet. This was pre-McDonald's. The 50s were before fast food. People walked everywhere. Everybody didn't have a car or two cars in the family or maybe three cars, so people walked. They walked to school. They walked to the market. They bought home. They brought the groceries home in a sack. They walked home. It was a different lifestyle. It was a different time for us here in the U.S. And people were slim. People were trim. So when he was trying to think about the optimal weight loss strategy from scratch, he'll spend part 2 of this book exploring all the key ingredients that might go into creating the ideal recipe for losing body fat and increasing health. In part 3 of this book, we're going to see how all the diets that are out there stack up against this criteria and against each other. And we're piecing together the foremost formula for healthy, sustainable weight control. That's what we want, sustainable weight control. In fact, a little book that I've been working on for a while, working on writing, the Don't Buy It diet, the Don't Buy It diet. Because if we don't buy it, we don't eat it. If we do buy it, we eat it. If you buy chips and ice cream and Coke and Fruit Loops and Pop Tarts, cookies, stuff, you're going to eat it just because it's in the house. Or you will probably eat it. Some people have more of a sweet tooth, some people have more of a salty preference. But if you don't buy it, you don't eat it. So if you're craving chips, but you go to the fridge and you look in your fridge and all that's there is cucumbers and green peppers and salad fixings and fruits on the counter. You got oats and you got rice and whole grains and maybe a bit of lean meat, some eggs. If that's what's in your fridge and you're craving chips, but you're not going to go out and buy the things that you're craving, instead you're just going to eat the green peppers and make the salad and throw in some hard-boiled eggs and have a healthier, happier, less expensive meal that you can make yourself, like they used to do in the old days when people actually cooked at home. So in part 4, he will unveil all the tricks and tweaks for fast-tracking weight loss that he's found through his years of scouring medical literature. There are ways to which any diet can be modified to maximize the loss of fat. He arranges the boosters in a simple daily checklist, so you're going to be able to pick and choose from a portfolio of techniques that are best for you. He wants to warn against skipping to that section and just going to the quick fixes while continuing to eat, his words, the same crappy foods. Although there are indeed different ways to eat the same foods to achieve better results, the boosters he's going to talk about are strictly meant to be adjuncts to a healthy diet. And then in the final section, he's going to lay to rest all the burning questions about burning fat, like what are the best ways to exercise to achieve maximum weight loss? How can you safely boost your metabolism? What's the optimum amount of sleep? Oh, high intensity interval training and intermittent fasting. And what does the science say about keto diets? He's also going to introduce us to specific foods that double as fat blockers and fat burners and starch blockers and appetite suppressants. And did you know that the different timing, frequencies, and combinations of food can also matter? There's even a food that can prevent the metabolic slowing that your body uses to attempt to frustrate your weight loss attempts. He says, are you skeptical? You should be. He says he was too. He went into this thinking he'd just end up railing against all of the gimmicky snake oil out there and put out much of the same standard advice on trimming calories and hitting the gym. He imagined what would set this work apart would be its comprehensive and strict grounding in science. He figured this book would distinguish itself but more as a book of reference than revolution. He never thought he'd stumble across some novel weight loss strategy. He didn't realize how many new paths would be opened up by newfound transformations in understanding so many fields of human physiology. He says it's been thrilling to weave together all of these cutting edge threads to design a weight loss protocol based on the best available evidence. This has been a mammoth but joyful undertaking for the doctor. People sometimes ask him why he doesn't take vacations or even a day off, and he has to explain that he thinks his whole day is a holiday. He feels blessed to be able to dedicate his time to helping people while doing what he loves, learning and sharing. He can't imagine doing anything else, and neither can I. Chapter 1 starts talking about the problem. Obesity isn't new, but the obesity epidemic is. We went from a few corpulent kings and queens like Henry VIII and Louis VI, who was also known as Louis the Fat, to a pandemic of obesity. And the problem is not just that we're overweight, because some overweight people are healthy, even very healthy. The problem is that we're overweight because we're eating really poor diets. That's the big problem. It's considered to be the most poorly contained public health threat of our time. I don't remember if he's going to talk in here about bariatric surgery or not, but that's one that upsets me a lot, because that's the doctor saying, I know that you don't have what it takes, or I'm not able to tell you what it takes to lose weight. But if we do this really expensive surgery and put you under a lot of anesthesia, you may, you're going to lose weight. And you're going to have to lose maybe 20 pounds to prove to me before we can do the surgery that you can stick to the restrictive diet that we're going to have for you afterward. Well, then that's a problem for me too, because that restrictive diet is going to mean there are things you can't eat because now your body can't handle it, because your body is not the way it used to be anymore. Anyway, I don't know if he'll talk about that or not, but I had to throw in my 2 cents worth. Expensive surgery. Earlier reports, today, 71% of American adults are overweight. 71%. 40% of men and women can be classified as obese. And even kids are chubby, chunky, heavy overweight. And that makes me think about the food that they serve them in schools. I have a lot of complaints about that. But they're feeding kids what kids will eat at home, or what they figure kids are eating at home. And if they figure kids are eating it at home, they'll happily eat it in school. But it doesn't make me happy. It's kind of like going down the cereal aisle in the supermarket. It doesn't make me happy. So I don't do that. For the last century, obesity appears to have jumped tenfold, from as few as 1 in 30 people to now 1 in 3. But it wasn't a steady rise. Some things seemed to happen around the late 70s, not just in the United States either. The obesity pandemic took off about the same time in most high-income countries around the globe. What might that trigger have been? Any potential driver would have had to have been global in nature and coincide with the upswing in weight gain. So it would have started about 40 or so years ago and spread rapidly around the world. Some people point to problems like city planning, and that communities were less conducive to walking, biking, and grocery shopping. But most blame the obesity epidemic on a lack of personal motivation. and that's not it. Are you telling me, the doctor says, that every sector of the United States population experienced some sort of simultaneous decline in willpower all at the same time? All the age, sex, and ethnic groups with all their different attitudes, experiences, coincidentally lost a collective capacity for self control at the same time? More plausible would be some change in the global nature of our lives. He calls the next chapter fast food versus slow motion. And then he goes on to talk about Coca-Cola spending $100.5 million. Leaked internal documents showed the company planned on using a front group as a weapon to change the conversation about obesity in its war with the public health community. I actually remember when I was in my 20s, my kids were little, and I thought that if I just drank Diet Pepsi all day, like 3 bottles a day of Diet Pepsi, instead of eating, I could lose weight and I could be healthy. And I was wrong. There are a few times in my life that I discovered I was wrong. And, okay, there might be more than a few, but that was one, and that was a serious one. And at that time, I'm sure it was based on the advertising that Pepsi and Coke were doing. This tactic to trick consumers is so common among food and beverage companies, it even has a name: lean washing. Lean washing. You've probably heard of greenwashing, where companies pretend that they're environmentally friendly. Lean washing is when companies try to position themselves as helping to solve the obesity crisis, but instead they're directly contributing to it. For example, Nestle, which is the largest food company in the world, has rebranded itself. Are you ready? Rebranded itself as the world's leading nutrition, health, and wellness company. Yep, that Nestle, the one that makes gobstoppers, stoppers, goobers, runts, nerds. They have another slogan: good food, good life. Well, that's true, except that, it's Raisinets and Cookie Crisp, stuff like that. The corporate drumbeat says it's just physical activity. You're not active enough. Well, couch potato-ness is actually one of the most common misconceptions about obesity. And editorial here, when we're eating poorly, we feel poorly. When you feel poorly, you don't feel like getting up and moving, walking around, taking a break, stretching, making your own food. You don't feel well. You're tired. Maybe you ache. All this bad food diet causes a lot of problems in our lifestyle. If anything, doctor says the level of physical activity over the last few decades has actually gone up slightly, both in Europe and North America, instead of declining. But the bump might be a result of the extra energy it takes to haul around our heavier bodies. Formal exercise is only a small part of our total daily activity, though. Think about how much physical exercise people used to do on the job, on the farm, in the home, washing the walls, beating the rugs, scrubbing the laundry, and now everything's all nice and automated. I love it. It's computerized, it's mechanized, it's motorization and urbanization. So we've had more sedentary lifestyles over the last century, and that's probably part of the problem in theory. We don't have to work as hard. We have vacuum cleaners instead of rug beaters, washing machines that wash the clothes themselves. But when the state-of-the-art methods to measure energy in and energy out, it was caloric intake, rather than physical activity that predicted weight gain over time. The common misconception that obesity is due mostly to lack of exercise might not just be a benign fallacy, as personal theories appear to impact people's weight. Those who blame insufficient exercise are significantly more likely to be overweight themselves. Put them in a room with chocolate, for instance, and they can be covertly or sneakily observed consuming more candy compared to those who put the problem of obesity and poor diet. The people who think obesity is caused by poor diet are more likely, probably, to eat a healthier diet. But we can't know exactly what's causing people. And the fat gene has been blamed a lot. Or he calls the chapter, Do these genes make me look fat? GENES. To date, there's about 100. This is interesting. 100 gene markers have been linked to obesity. But when you put all of them together, they account for less than 3% of the difference in body mass index between people. The fat gene you might have heard about, which is also called FTO, it stands for fat, F-A-T, fat, mass, and obesity associated, is the gene most strongly linked to obesity, but it explains less than 1% of the difference between people, less than a third of a percent. FTO codes for a brain protein that appeared to affect your appetite. So, are you one of the billion people on Earth who has a full complement of FTO susceptibility gene? Doesn't really matter because this only appears to result in a difference in intake of a few hundred extra calories a year. What it really took to lead to the obesity epidemic is more like a few hundred extra calories a day. FTO is the gene so far known to have the most effect on excess weight gain, but the chances of accurately predicting obesity risk based on FTO status are as good as flipping a coin. When it comes to obesity, the power of your genes is nothing compared to the power of your fork or your fingers. Depends what kind of food you're eating. Physically active people appear to have less effect from the FTO gene, and those who completely eat healthier diets have no effect. It only seems to affect people who eat diets higher in saturated fats, which are predominantly found in dairy, meat, and junk food. Those eating more healthily appear to have no greater risk of weight gain, even if they have the fat gene. It also doesn't appear to affect your ability to lose weight. Psychologically, if you know you have the fat gene, you might think, I'm at a disadvantage. I can hardly lose weight. But the reality is that's not true. Children who were growing up with two overweight biological parents were found to be 27% more likely to be overweight themselves. However, adopted children who were placed in a home with two overweight parents were only 21% more likely to be overweight. So genetics plays a role, but it might be environment more than genetics. He has some interesting uh, stories here and examples of the power of diet over DNA. Comes from the Pima Indians of Arizona, who have the highest rates in Arizona of obesity and diabetes in the world. So some people have said this is because they have a relatively fuel-efficient genetic makeup. They don't waste their energy, they store it. And that may have served them well in times of periodic scarcity when they were living off the land. But when the area became settled, their source of water, the Gila River, was diverted upstream. Those who survived the ensuing famine had to abandon their traditional diet and live off government food programs. Chronic disease skyrocketed. Some genes, same genes, different diet, leading to a different result. A natural experiment was set up accidentally. The Pima, who lived across the border in Mexico, come from the same gene pool, but they were able to maintain more of their traditional lifestyle centered around the food staples, which are known as the Three Sisters: corn, beans, and squash. Same genes, but 5 times less diet-based diabetes, 5 times less diabetes and obesity. Genes might load the gun. Diet pulls the trigger. And then we have the evolution of the fattest. I've kind of thought it's not so bad to have a few extra pounds in case one gets sick. Then you have a few extra pounds to carry you through. It's been said that nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. We were born to eat. We were born to eat. We have to eat. We have to eat to survive. Most of human history, we existed in survival mode. There was scarcity, so we had a powerful drive to eat as much as we can while we can. And we just store the calories we don't need right away on our bodies for later. Food availability could never be taken for granted, so those who ate more in the moment were able to best store more fat for future energy needs, and they might better survive subsequent shortages to pass along their genes to the future generations. So those with lesser appetites might have died out, but the ones who gorged themselves could have selectively lived long enough to pass along a genetic predisposition to eat and store more calories. This may be how we evolved into such voracious calorie-conserving machines. But now that we're no longer in such lean times, we're no longer so lean. This is described as a thrifty gene concept. The proposal that obesity is the result of a mismatch between the modern environment that we live in and the environment in which we originally evolved. So the prime cause for the obesity epidemic is not gluttony, and it's not sloth. It may simply be a normal response to an abnormal environment. Abnormal environment. That includes foods in the market, or things that are called foods in the market, things that are called drinks in the market, fast food restaurants that we drive by. Restaurants. When you're cooking at home, you know what you're eating. When you go to a restaurant, they can add a few extra things to make the food extra tasty, so you want to come back. Good idea. It's a good idea. Much of our physiology is finely tuned to stay within a narrow range of upper and lower limits. If we get too hot, we sweat. If we get too cold, we shiver. Our bodies have mechanisms to keep us in balance. But our bodies had a little reason to develop an upper limit to the accumulation of body fat. In the beginning, there may have been evolutionary pressures to stay lithe and nimble in the face of predators, but thanks in part to weapons and fire, we haven't had to outrun many saber-toothed tigers over the last couple million years or so. This may have left our genes with a one-sided selection pressures to binge on every possible morsel and salt and stockpile as many calories as possible into our bodies. What was once adaptive for us is now a problem, or at least, says the thrifty gene hypothesis that originated more than half a century ago. The theory has since been refined and updated, but the basic premise remains largely accepted by the scientific community. The implications are profound. In 2013, the American Medical Association voted to classify obesity as a disease against the advice of its own Council on Science and Public Health. Not that that necessarily matters what we call it. A rose by any other name would cause just as much diabetes, but disease implies dysfunction. It implies a problem with our bodies. Bariatric drugs and surgery are not fixing some physiological malfunction. Our bodies, your body, my body, our bodies are doing just what they were designed to do in the face of excess calories, rather than some sort of disorder, weight gain, may largely be a normal response by normal people to an abnormal situation. We can alter that abnormal situation. With more than 70% of Americans are overweight now, it's become a normal situation. Mm. We're going to talk more about this next time. We're going to continue on. Today we got through the intro here, the preface here, about 16 pages. But we'll talk more the next time. Looking forward to talking with you then. I'm Kathryn Merrow, the Pain Relief Coach. Book we're talking about today is How Not to Diet. Michael Krieger, still hard to read backwards, MD. Fascinating book. Looking forward to talking with you soon. Goodbye.